The WNIT is here. 64 teams will find a way, and one will be crowned the WNIT champs. Let's see if it happens again. There's going to be a new NIT champion compared to the men's NIT. We're going to have two new National Invitational Tournament champions in 2023. Let's break down this field of 64 here at Slasher U. Let's talk about some of the teams that we're excited for seeing, some sleeper teams maybe inside the field between the four groups, and who we think is going to win the whole dang thing when it's over. First, Steve, let's get into it. Let's start off with Group 1. Let's just real quick read down the list of Group 1, and then we'll dig into a couple of teams we get excited about. Oregon against North Dakota State, BYU versus Rice, San Diego State, UC Irvine, San Diego, Long Beach State, Wyoming versus Texas A&M, Corpus Christi, Kansas State versus Wichita State, Washington versus San Francisco, and New Mexico versus Northern Arizona. When I say those games, which one sticks out to you the most? Which team do you see as a favorite, and which team do you see as a sleeper in Group
1? I think the Oregon-North Dakota State game is going to be more tightly contested than people think. I really like North Dakota State. They've been a little bit up and down this year. Oregon's Oregon. I mean, they were 17-14 this year. I think they have a much deeper roster than North Dakota State does, but North Dakota State, like all the teams, in the breadbasket out there in the Midwest, they can shoot the three. So if they can find their stroke, I think Oregon could be in some trouble there. I really like the Wyoming, Texas A&M, Corpus Christi. In fact, I have Wyoming winning the group. I think that Allison Ferdig, their center, she's a special player. She's a really special player. I also like the Washington-San Francisco matchup. Kansas State, Wichita State's interesting, but I think Washington, San Francisco has had some moments. And while Washington, again, you would think, okay, Pac-12, Power 5, Delia Daniels inside, Jada Noble outside. I think it's a nice matchup, and that's a team that I could see go deep. But I have Wyoming coming out of this one. I think Wyoming, they won the Mountain West. They're a 22-win team. Not a lot of people know about them, but I think they have the balance and they have the inside presence that Wyoming could just kind of clear the deck here.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things that I was going to say, to be honest. I really like Wyoming as well, but I'm a little more higher on Washington. I think Washington's going to make a deeper run, although you kind of agreed with it. You could say you kind of saw it. I think that does happen. I think we're going to see a Pac-12 rematch in the Grade 8. I think we're going to have Oregon versus Washington in the Grade 8 out of Group 1. And I will go ahead and give Oregon the nod on that one. However, I think Washington makes a pretty deep run, but wouldn't be surprised to see Wyoming taking on Washington in the Super 16. Would not be surprised to see that whatsoever in this matchup. All right, let's head on over to Group 2. And this is going to be, I think this is a really interesting group. This is one of the ones that I'm actually really excited for. Rhode Island versus Boston, Richmond versus Penn, Massachusetts versus Albany, Harvard versus Towson, Syracuse versus Kent State, Seton Hall versus St. Joe's, Fordham versus Drexel, Columbia versus FDU. Who is your favorite? Who's your sleeper in Group 2, Steve?
My favorite's Columbia. Again, I have Ivy League fever, I guess, this postseason. Columbia, again, Princeton won the NCAA bid, but Columbia may be one of the most dynamic teams players in a non-Power 5 conference along the East Coast there. I think they have everything. Abby Sue shoots almost as well from three, 41% as she does from the field at 42%. She averages about 12.5 points a game. She's a really, really special player. They're a little on the small side, so that could trip them up, as they go in and they play more physical teams like Seton Hall or St. Joseph's, whoever wins there, or Syracuse. But, I mean, they literally could start 5 guards at any given time. And Sue is one of them, Caitlin Davis, Kitty Henderson, and I'm missing a fourth who actually may be the most high ceiling of them all. But I think Columbia by far is the class of Group 2. I like Rhode Island. They finished second in the A-10. I can see Seton Hall making some noise. I can see UMass making some noise. But for me, it's you start with Columbia and you end with Columbia. I think Columbia just wins right out.
I like Columbia as well. I think Columbia is a good one. However, I'm leaning towards Syracuse to come out of that half of the group. I think Syracuse is going to have had a good season, and I think obviously it wasn't as great of a season get to the NCAA tournament, but good enough, I think, to make a nice push in the NIT. And then I have to go with Rhode Island. I think Rhode Island, as you mentioned, what they did in the A10 this year, yes, it wasn't enough to get the win over St. Louis in the A10 for them to get to the NCAA tournament. However, give me Rhode Island over Syracuse, Rhode Island making it out of this group. Heading over to Group 3, this is where it gets fun as well. I mean, there's plenty to talk about in Group 3. Nebraska versus Missouri State, Northern Iowa versus Colorado State, Missouri versus Illinois State, Kansas, Western Kentucky, Stephen F. Austin versus Texas State, Arkansas, La Tech, Texas Tech, UTEP, and SMU versus Little Rock. I know there's a couple teams in here that we talked about this season over on SlasherU on the YouTube page. Who's your favorite and who is your sleeper out of Group 3?
I'm going to go with my sleeper. My sleeper is Northern Iowa. Again, guard play, ability to hit the three, hit them in bunches. Northern Iowa has beaten a lot of teams already in this bracket. They've beaten Illinois State. They have wins against Vanderbilt. They have wins against Arkansas. They beat Drake twice, and I think Drake could be a sleeper in the NCAA women's side. So I really like Northern Iowa out of here. It would be a nice Cinderella story, if you will. And people have kind of written off and forgotten about Nebraska, but they're a good basketball team. So for me, whoever comes out of that in the second round, I have Nebraska and Northern Iowa, winning their games. Whoever wins that contest, I think goes on to win Group 3. The only other team I could point to would probably be Kansas. I think Kansas is an interesting team. I don't think they ever really gelled all year, but I think Kansas can make some noise out of Group 3 as well.
All right. Yeah, I'm with that as well. I think plenty good thoughts in Group 3. If I had to lean on it, though, I think I'm going to go back to what you originally said in the middle of your conversation there. Don't forget about Nebraska. And I think they're going to remind folks that you should not be forgetting that team. There was a time this season Nebraska was ranked for quite some time, actually. So obviously they fell out of the tournament. They had some rough goes towards the ends of it. I think they find a way in Group 3 to bring it back. So that's my favorite there. I don't really see a lot of underdogs in this one. Colorado State, maybe. I think we could maybe see something from Colorado State. If I'm pointing at it, if you want, I guess you could call them an underdog since they are playing UNI. And then La Tech. I did see a lot of good things from La Tech in the Sun Belt tournament. So possibly those two teams. But I think Nebraska wins this group. I think they win it comfortably, if I'm being honest with you, Steve. I think that is the case.
Yeah, I looked at Texas Tech too, but it's been kind of a down year, in the Big 12 on the women's side. They've been wildly inconsistent, so I kind of dismissed them right away and thought if anybody's coming out of that, they're representing the Big 12, coming out of that would have been Kansas. But I still say you're high on Nebraska. I have a hard time debating that, except that I really think Northern Iowa, because they have had so many big wins, many teams in this bracket they've already beaten. I think Northern Iowa is going to be the team that you're going to have to watch. But that's the game. That second round game is the game that's going to determine Group 3.
Who rounds out Group 4? Well, let's go down to it now. Bowling Green versus Liberty, Green Bay against Niagara, Memphis, Jackson State, Ball State, Belmont, Florida and Woodford, Wake Forest, Morgan State, Auburn, Tulane, and Clemson High Point is the rounding out of the 64 here in the NIT. I guess I'll go first in this one. My favorite for this one is Memphis. I think Memphis is going to be a solid contender in Group 4. My underdog, which I think actually comes out and wins the entire Group 4, although I guess you could call that my favorite as well. Give me High Point. I think High Point is going to have an excellent run in Group 4. What I saw from them from the season, they didn't have the best conference tourney, although they weren't set up quite nicely with their competitors. But give me High Point to go and win Group 4. There's always one team that makes that really Cinderella run, I think High Point's the one that does that. They got to start off really tough against a Clemson team, then possibly an Auburn team, and then maybe even Florida to get to the Great Eight. Still give me High Point. I'm taking that.
That's a really gutsy pick, and not because you're going out on a limb there, but I mean, really, people are going to they're going to think, oh, Clemson, 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 and they're going to overlook High Point. But yet, High Point can score with anybody. So that's an interesting pick. I think I'm going to go with Wake Forest coming out of here. They haven't had an overwhelmingly great year, but I think they're battle tested within the conference. I think the conference was no outstanding teams per se coming out of there, but I think, unless you say Notre Dame or whatever, but I think there was a lot of back and forth battling there in the ACC. I like Wake Forest coming out. If I was going to pick a team that was going to be a sleeper, I want to say Niagara, but I think they're a little small. I don't know that they can do it. It's going to be Ball State. I've seen them play some really competitive games, against Indiana and some other big time. I want to say I saw them play Illinois as well. And even though they didn't win, they were in it for most of the game. So I'm going to give you my sleepers being Ball State. I think they could make some noise. I'm surprised you didn't go with Florida. The Florida's roster seems to be like the kind of team that you would really, really go with. But High Point, man, I love that, Christian. I love that pick.
Yeah, it's more of a love for High Point than Florida, because I do think that they do have to face Florida to get to the Great Eight. I think Florida is going to be the team that they have to face to get that far. I think that's as far as probably High Point goes when you get to my projected Final Four, if you will, would be High Point, Oregon, Nebraska, and Rhode Island. My predictions for the WNIT championship is Nebraska versus Rhode Island, and Nebraska taking the whole thing. I really do think that Nebraska makes a comeback in this tournament after having a rough go from this season after being preseason ranked. I know that doesn't really mean much on the men's side. We just saw it happen to North Carolina starting number 1, not even making the tournament. Nebraska obviously wasn't in that kind of situation, but they are a team that I think can rebound and get themselves back into a good picture. That's why I have Nebraska getting the win over Rhode Island in the WNIT championship on April 1st. Who do you got?
I think I'm going Columbia.
Ivy.
Yeah, it's just there's such an interesting team. Just like I kind of dismissed Niagara when we were just talking about that group, that being kind of on the small side. I think Columbia shoots well enough and is fundamentally sound team where I think that they can overcome that size disadvantage. And I think they're just going to shoot the lights out all the way through. My heart wants to go with Northern Iowa, potentially, but Nebraska. They had some tough injuries. They really, really did. But I'm going to go with Columbia. I think Columbia is going to be just one of those teams that sort of captures the nation's imagination. And don't dismiss. I mean, WNIT is a much larger field than the men's side, but for the first time that I can remember, there are not any overmatched teams on the women's side of the WNIT at all. I mean, you can look at every team and you can point to something positive or to a particular player that could make a difference. So I think just like the primary bracket on the women's side is probably the best field we've seen. Absolutely, with the WNIT, this is the best, deepest, most competitive women's national invitation tournament that we have ever seen, and that just bodes really well for the future of women's college basketball.
100%. Couldn't agree with you more. Let us know your thoughts in the comment description below, who you think is going to win the WNIT tournament. We're both on different sides here. You got an Ivy League team. I got a team that is looking for redemption from Nebraska. We want to know what you think. It could go either way. It could go 64 different ways, to be completely honest, in this one. So let us know, hit like and subscribe while you're there. And thanks for watching SlasherU.